Okay, thanks, Paul. So I'm going to speak about 3 grants, and if you need to leave, you'll find all the material on these slides. There is a web page related to each of these grants, so you'll be able to find this information, so I won't keep us too long in going through them. But the first I want to talk about is natural resource damages. Paul, could I have the next slide? And this is related to the former National Fireworks site in Hanover. This site is a 300-acre former munitions site that's contaminated with metals contamination, and there was a significant natural resource damage settlement for this site for injury to sediment and surface water bodies, impacted fish, natural resources in the adjacent factory pond and Indian Head River. And the settlement funds from the for this project are to be used for projects that restore, replace, or acquire the equivalent of the natural resources that were damaged by the contamination. And some of the examples of those projects would include, but are not limited to, projects that would increase habitat accessible for diadromous fish, improve stream connectivity through dam removal or culvert replacement, and other kind of habitat improvements. Next slide, Paul. So this particular grant opportunity is coming up soon, so the timing is good in terms of highlighting it for you today. In this first phase, the grants will be focused on field surveys and inventories and feasibility type studies for potential restoration projects down the line. And so the grant is opening up $680,000 for these types of feasibility work. And ultimately, as I said, the restoration projects must be used to restore the fisheries, rivers, and wetlands in the North Indian Head and Drinkwater rivers, as well as Factory Pond. And so the information from this phase of work would then be used for the restoration projects that would be put into the restoration plan for the site. And it's overseen by the Natural Resource Damages Trustee Council, which includes DEP staff and as well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And notably for DEP, this work is being managed by our new natural resource damage coordinator, or at least new since this group last met, Michelle Craddock. And Michelle is also supported by Kathy Kiley on this work in terms of the grants and the grant contracts. And the virtual public meeting for this offering is coming up on March 25th. And if you go to that link, you'll find information about that meeting. So this meeting will be held ahead of the grant announcement, or the time that you can actually apply for the grant, which I see here is expected, but I think that means it could change, but that's expected to be April 13th. Next slide, Paul.
No, before we do the next slide, since you introduced Michelle Craddock,
I was going to hold that for the end in case there were any questions, but this is fine time to do that.
Okay, we have Michelle here. Michelle, could you say a few words just to bring your picture up on the screen?
Yep. Thanks, Liz and Paul. So as Liz said, I'm Michelle Craddock. I'm the new Natural Resource Damages Program Coordinator at DEP. I've been here since about mid-August and have been trying to learn everything about the Natural Resource Damages Program. I'm excited to kick off this kind of restoration planning at the fireworks site. And I encourage anyone that has questions about that or questions about anything related to NRD to, send me an email, give me a call. Definitely happy to talk anytime, and very excited and happy to be at DEP in this position. And thanks for having me.
Thanks, Michelle. So the next grant we want to talk about, which is also coming up, although the dates are less certain, but we're happy to announce the return of the technical assistance grants that are aimed at enhancing public involvement. And just a little history about this program. We had started technical assistance grants back in 1995, and they ran through 2002, and there was a hiatus there for a few years. They returned in 2007 after, at the time, there were also some changes to the public involvement regulations, and ran for a few more years to 2010, but we haven't offered them in the period in between. And I think in bringing these back, I think it's really consistent with our other efforts to support public involvement in the sites more fully, and as well as attracting participation from EJ communities and other citizens who feel impacted by what's going on in disposal sites. The technical assistance grants are awarded to community and citizens group, and their purpose is to obtain expert advice, technical assistance in understanding response action submittals, and also the money from the grants can be used to provide public education to the community on what's going on in the site and ways to be involved. Next slide, Paul. So unlike the other, this particular grant actually has a section in the MCP that describes who's eligible, who's not eligible, eligible disposal sites, and eligible activities. So we have a lot of guidance there in terms of offering this grant. This is new for us in terms of doing the grant, or new for many of us. It's our first time involved in doing this grant offering for a few years. And the group that is working on it includes Nancy Fitzpatrick and Peggy Shaw, as well as Rhonda Russian, who's looks at the contracting issues with respect to the grant. But we do have the benefit of Patty Mullen, who used to be involved in this program, and she's still with the department in the underground storage tank program. So she's been guiding us in getting this up and running again. But as you can see from this slide, in terms of who's eligible, it would include a group of citizens that come together to form as a group. That could be like a PIP site group. It can also be a municipal group that applies for the grant, as well as operators of public water supplies that have been affected by a disposal site. It can apply to any site that's been tier classified, but not sites that have achieved a permanent solution. The exception there would be if they achieve a permanent solution at some time during the process of actually applying and receiving the grant. It can apply to sites on the federal national priorities list and sites considered adequately regulated. And some example of eligible activities includes technical assistance that may be provided, for example, by an LSP. Resources in terms of doing public education about the site. It could even apply to seeking legal advice from an attorney in terms of how the group can be involved in the site. Next slide, Paul. So the schedule for this is still in the works, although we're aiming to hold a virtual public meeting ahead of having the applications available in the spring timeframe. The dates are still up in the air because our paperwork in terms of putting the application together is still undergoing approval, but we expect to have that soon. And we do have a website up that gives much the same information I just covered. We're gathering emails from people who want to receive some advance notice of the virtual public meeting. We've also gone back and looked at our active PIP groups to gather their email information so we can provide them with notice, and looking at other groups that we think may be interested. I think the grants will be in the amount up to $15,000 per applicant. We have a $150,000 put aside for this first round. And if you'd like more information, as I mentioned, the Nancy Fitzpatrick and Peggy Shaw are working on this project. You can contact them, or also contact us through BWSC information. Next, Paul. And then finally, I wanted to mention the Marine Oil Spill Prevention and Response Act grants. This grant actually is in the process and will soon be awarded. They held the meeting for this back in September, but these grants are funded through the Marine Oil Spill Prevention and Response Act Trust Fund. And the purpose of them is to advance oil spill prevention by looking at projects solicited from municipalities, as well as other groups. Public and private groups can apply for these grants, and looking for projects that would support the kind of work DEP has already done using the money from the trust, which includes the response action trailers that have been distributed to coastal communities, the geographic response action planning, the exercises to respond to spills with first responders, and the navigational buoys that have been deployed by the program. So the offering in this last round was up to $50,000 per project, with a total of $500,000 available, and the final grants are expected out later this month in terms of who will be receiving the grants. And the program anticipates that they will offer another round in spring of 2022. Next slide, Paul. So here is just the contact information for that grant. There is a website there, as you'll see, and Julie Hutchinson manages this program, and it has worked with Steve Mahoney on this grant funding round. So either of them are available if you have questions about it.
And shout out to Julie and Steve, and also Rhonda Russian, who helped them as well. This was a de novo grant program. This is the first year that they put it out, and we anticipate it will be an annual event going forward, hopefully. And they did a great job putting it together and getting this started. Okay. Somebody's going to say something?
No.
Okay.
I think that's it, Paul. Unless there are questions.
Okay, if there are questions, I'm just giving everybody the ability to talk. So you now have the ability to unmute yourselves. Don't go crazy. That's the end of the formal presentation though. So we'll stay here for a little while. We are not offended if you take off. We're already about 20 minutes over time. So thank you for sticking around for the entire presentation. All of this will be available on the web within the next couple of days. So your mics are potentially open. Any questions, any comments, not only on the grant programs, but anything else that we've talked about?
Hey, Paul.
Yes.
I was curious, just on back to the discussion of the organization of the committee. Could you just speak for a minute on the weekly, and as you described, hopefully not weekly moving forward or whatever, office hours, how they, I think when it was rolled out at the meeting we had, the last BWSC meeting, which was last spring, I think, it was kind of, I thought it was being rolled out as kind of an opportunity for people to ask, I would say, more site-specific questions regarding BWSC and their projects during the COVID period. And I was just curious, has that evolved over time, and is there more discussions occurring that, you know, as a participant on this board, it would be interesting for us to hear or to participate in those, or is it down more in the granular as I thought it was at the onset?
Good question. First, it was set up initially to address the kind of the implications of COVID and the pandemic and the lockdown, and how it affected site work during that period. And things, if you remember back then, life seemed to be moving very quickly and things were happening every day. And we're making up as we went along. So that was its origins. I think it went through a period of time when it was as much psychotherapy, of having a place to go. You knew it was almost the end of the week because it was Thursday morning, and we had to get online. And by psychotherapy, I mean for me. It helped me, and I hope it was enjoyable for other people. And informative. But I think in the more recently, it has, as we've been considering how to kind of use the advisory committee and how to be more accessible, particularly where we may be, working remotely, into the future in some form or another. When we go back, there's going to be a lot more flexibility in how we work, and I think the office hours has been a good opportunity to have more informal contact. I think I've said this a lot during those office hours. We're more than happy to hear your questions during the office hours. We're not promising any answers to them. So I think what we do get are a lot of granular questions that we can get back later after looking into it. So it's a good way of bringing things to our attention, either on a site-by-site basis or kind of broader. I think we've also been using it to just update people on where we are on things, which we would normally do in an advisory committee meeting as well. So sometimes it gets repetitive because on a week-to-week basis, for some projects, things don't change that quickly. So they are available online to go back and listen to and watch if you can take that. I can't revisit them, but if you're looking at it for the first time, it's probably not bad. And they tend to be in the 30-minute or so range. If you're actually doing it live, there's talk beforehand and there's sometimes talk afterwards, but the formal part of it is about a half hour. So they tend to be somewhat accessible. I don't think they replace the advisory committee meetings, but it is a good kind of stopgap in between advisory committee meetings.
This is Steve Johnson. I had a question. I had a comment about Liz's presentation on the technical advisory grants. Yeah. I think one of the conditions for applying is that like if you're a group of citizens, you have to be a legal entity. Could you clarify that? What that means to be a legal entity?
I'll try. Yes, at the time that they receive the money, they have to be set up as a legal entity so that we can give them the grant money. So I think that means that they have to, for example, set themselves up as a nonprofit with the Secretary of State's office. I'm not sure if that information is on the website. It may be.
I'm looking now.
But that's the kind of information we will go over in the meeting, the pre-grant announcement meeting, the details of how to do that.
Liz, it is on the website, there's a section called Who is Eligible to Apply? And there's a link to the Secretary of State Corporations Office and the information there that describes that. How to become a legal entity.
Thank you.
This is Linda Siegel. Saying hello to Steve Johnson as well, but I'd like to remind everybody that when the Down Neighbors Group in 1994 was seeking the TAG grant, we did form a not-for-profit. And I think being able to have all that information on the website is just so helpful, because back then, it was learning by doing. So thank you very much. But that does work. But it is, for some groups, it may be a challenge because there's a cost involved. There's management of that kind of organization involved. You have to set up, rules and file them with the state. So it requires a little bit of help for a citizens group that, may not know much about how to do that.
Thanks, Linda. And I think what we'd be looking to do at that meeting is to provide some overview of what that would entail, and then also be available to provide some assistance after the fact.
Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions or comments, one last thought. I did run across a description of kind of what I'm feeling, and many of us are feeling as we're coming to the end of this COVID thing, described as channel fever. That feeling you have when a ship that's been out, and I think it was described when I heard it like a Navy ship, when you've been out on deployment for a long time and you're coming in and you're right by the land, but you're told it's still going to take a few hours before you can get off the ship. And I think we're all going to that. So take care of yourself, get out, take some time off, get outside, the weather is getting better. And I think we'll try to be meeting quarterly. We'll set up a schedule, we'll send out emails, we'll put it on the website. And by the next time that we meet formally like this, we should be in a much better position across the board. So thank you all for coming, and hope to see you soon. And if you haven't checked out the weekly wayside cleanup office hours, the same link that you use for this meeting will get you there at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock on Thursday mornings. Okay.
Thanks, Paul and Liz.
Thanks, Paul, Liz,
Thanks,
Ken,
Liz.
and all.
Nice to see everybody. Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.
Happy spring.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Happy weekend.
You too.